Hello and welcome everyone to Devlog number 11. This week was a longer week because it was Easter break, so I basically had 2 weeks instead of one to get stuff done, which was pretty handy because do I feel like I'm behind? Yes, but I kind of always feel like I'm behind, so I've lost sense of what behind actually looks like. But anyway, so the first thing I'm going to start with is the email app. It's pretty much done. I've got everything laid out quite plainly and well labeled just to help myself make sense of things, but it's split into two parts. So there's the vert on the left, which contains the little previews for each email, so I can toggle those on and off. During the game, these game objects will just be toggled on and off to basically represent you've received an email. It's going to be pretty straightforward. And then each one of these email game objects is a button which just set active the current email or the corresponding email and then make sure the rest of them are off. So they work pretty straightforward. I can go ahead and turn on email number 2. They're just placeholders for now. Nothing actually is in the other ones apart from the first email. But you can see when I right click on them, it just switches over. So with this email here, the first one, for the game itself, this email is going to be the only one in the inbox at the start. And it's going to help to set the scene, kind of give the player something to actually do, something to read, and tell them why they're playing. So it just says you've been invited to a job interview basically, and you need to download the interview wizard to complete your interview. So clicking here brings up this little downloading thing which I made. I do have a time-lapse speed thing of how I made this little loading icon. I just felt like making my own, so that was fun. Hello, this is me from the future. The first thing to do was just to make a bunch of squares that revolved around the middle. Then I set up the black and white gradient just so that I could give them that effect. And then I actually used Photoshop's timeline to rotate it and then print out many rotated versions, if that makes sense. And then I just arranged them into another Photoshop file so that I could cut them up for the sprite sheet in Unity. But if I show in the hierarchy what that actually looks like, so it's in the pop-up layer. I've tried to make things draggable with my draggable icon script, but it's not really working, so I do need to fix the draggables at some point. They work with the apps, but not the windows, and I don't really know why. I think it's to do with the rect transform, but I kind of can't assign it properly, so I do need to figure that out. But yes, very simply, the spinner, sorry, I had a bunch of different versions. It's just an animated GIF style thing where the animator just starts and it just goes around. The sprites for that are here. This is the sprite sheet. If it loads, there you go. It's very simple. There's nothing fancy to it. I had a bunch of different versions because I couldn't really decide which one I wanted to go with, but I decided. So that's all that is. It also, more importantly, has a loading bar. So this loading bar is what's going to get changed if we go to the loading bar script. It isn't very complicated, it just has a few things that I needed it to do basically. So this was my first time using a slider inside of Unity, so there are a few things to figure out. It took me a very long time to realize that it actually needs a listener to actually figure out when the slider is changing. Add progress is tied to obviously just progressing the download bar further along. I've got on slider value changed, so it basically just keeps checking is the slider 100 or over. And then download complete, it changes how it looks just by toggling stuff on and stuff off. It's very rudimentary. I love Unity events. They are basically 95% of my project. I can turn it off for now, and then we can go through how the game is actually going to use that. So clicking here will start the download automatically. Click that button, and now the game object is on. So you can close that. And then the idea is that whilst this is downloading, I'm kind of doing other stuff. The assumption is that maybe the player thinks that they have to literally just wait and then stuff will happen. Maybe you want to go on the internet. The internet app is actually another new addition for this devlog. It uses a scroll view and basically contains all the pages inside of that. It is, however, broken and I don't really know why. So you can see here I'm scrolling, but it doesn't move, like the background or page zero doesn't really move along with it, which I don't know why. Once I click begin, page 1 is the only page that works, and I don't know why, but I'll figure that out at some point. So this is I don't know if anyone who is watching this remembers, but I had that twine thing near the beginning. I think it was my first devlog actually, and I planned out the questions and how the allocated points would go, like with the variables and the fear categories, so that's what this is. I planned it out then, and now it's actually happening. So if I just randomly answer all of these, you can see the downloading bar is going up, and then eventually it's finished. So that is using that function from before. If I go, for example, to just one of the buttons, so I have this fear increaser script, which basically just does what it says. It increases the fears based on the options that you've chosen. I will be honest, this script is not great. I have done everything very manually because I'm lazy / I don't really know how to do things well, if I'm honest. But it has a few functions. So it's got click next, which sets the current page to false and the next page to active, which does, as you can imagine, it will, if I just turn this on, it just sets one page off and then it sets the other page on. That's basically just how I'm doing everything. Again, Unity events are great. So that's what click next does, and then it has story manager.email trigger. So this, if I go up here to my managers, story manager, email trigger is connected obviously to the email application, and this is what I mentioned before, where I'm just using Unity events to toggle the things in this vert on and off. So this will toggle email to on, which means you can click on it and actually read that email. So it's basically just saying, you know, as you progress and as you play, and as one of the fear amounts goes over 3, that will trigger. So that is just how that works. It's pretty straightforward. And it's also adding progress to the loading bar. So I have a bunch of different variables for each fear. So animal, situation, just, you know, all the phobia categories, sorry. And they all basically do the same thing, but they specifically increase the fears in the fear manager. So the fear manager, we're all acquainted with that script by now. So it specifically is mapped to increase each fear. And then it does what the other ones do. It triggers the email, or it checks if the email should be triggered, and then it adds progress to the loading bar. They're all the same. So if I go, for example, to maybe page 7, it has these 2 buttons, right? And I've done it manually, where I've said that this button on the right represents a situational phobia, and then the button on the left represents an environmental phobia. So by clicking the answer on the right, it's because you're more scared of the option on the left, which is the environmental one, which is why the button on the right increases the environmental fear. That's basically it. That is the logic I've applied to all the buttons, and they're all like manually mapped, but I did obviously do the planning for it beforehand, which I think was helpful. But yeah, that's basically how those 2 work. So what I'm going to do is quickly run through it again, just so I can show how the game feels a bit. So you've got the downloading bar, so you go on the internet, you download the thing, it's down. So when the download is complete, the Whisper app actually appears. And what is the Whisper app? It is our dear friend Wilbert. So that just toggles him on, and then you can go ahead and talk to him and, you know, do whatever is going to happen. But yeah, that's basically it. I got a decent amount done, but I, you know, just have to keep on going, and hopefully I can be done with the Unity side of stuff with 3 weeks left, so that I can still have that 3 weeks to work on the written side of things, which I don't know if I'll document. Maybe I'll talk about it a little bit, but obviously I have to do the testing and stuff, so I might do a video talking about the testing and talking about some of the information, or data, sorry, that I received. But yeah, that is it for this one. Thank you.